The light scratching of graphite on thick, heavily textured drafting paper carries a dry, repetitive sound that slowly fills the quiet corners of our private room. A rhythmic scrape that mimics the unyielding friction of our own hesitant minds. We sit huddled over wide walnut desks, our eyes narrowed into a tight, hyper-focused gaze that scans the clean margins of our blueprints for the slightest geometric deviation or structural flaw. Around us, the cold smell of linseed oil, mineral spirits, and turpentine rises from rows of untouched camel hair brushes, drying in pristine porcelain trays without ever having met the wet, unpredictable surface of a live canvas. Neatly arranged across our shelves are rows of half-finished manuscripts, their edges perfectly squared, their titles written in elegant, disciplined script, yet their pages remaining entirely frozen at the introductory chapter, locked away in an expensive desk cabinet, where no crude or unintegrated sentence is ever allowed to disrupt the symmetry. We find our hands hovering a single agonizing millimeter above the white surface of our paper, frozen in an isometric paralysis, unable to make the first definitive mark, unable to let the ink drop, held fast by an invisible, suffocating shield of perpetual preparation. In this silent workshop of delayed creation, we have become masterful curators of the potential masterpiece, convincing ourselves that our endless refinements are a sign of deep devotion to excellence, when they are actually an act of absolute cowardice, designed to protect our fragile pride from the terrifying, necessary verdict of raw material reality. We have converted our creative expression into a permanent research project, establishing an internal court of validation where every original impulse must produce a dozen technical credentials before it is granted the right to emerge into the light. When an idea arises within the quiet soil of our imagination, we do not simply let it break through our fingers into a crude, immediate form. We drag it straight to our internal editing desk, filtering its life force through a labyrinth of second guesses, comparison matrices, and masterclass manuals. We tell ourselves that we are not yet ready to speak, that our technique requires one more year of rigorous refinement, that our style must be completely consolidated before we risk exposure, or that the current cultural landscape is too dangerous for an unpolished voice. We collect certifications like a merchant collects coins, hiding our smallness behind the names of prestigious lineages and advanced training protocols, completely blind to the truth that this chronic calibration is an institutionalized style of emotional defense. We are using our extensive library of knowledge to construct a magnificent, maximum security moat around our vulnerability, ensuring that our actual amateur core never has to stand naked in the public square, trading the thunder of real-world action for the sterile, unthreatened sanctuary of a permanent blueprint. Let us bring our full, non-conceptual awareness to the image of the silt-drowned iron bell, the ancient primeval monument that stands as a silent map of our creative paralysis. The silt-drowned iron bell is a massive ancient temple instrument cast centuries ago from raw bronze and heavy iron ores, designed to hang from an oaken beam on a high mountain ridge, where its deep, resonant voice could travel across miles of open valley. But during a catastrophic historical flood, the support structure collapsed, and the bell plunged downward into the dark bottom of a sluggish, muddy marshland at the foot of the hills. Over decades of stagnation, the slow, creeping currents of the river have packed its interior throat tight with thick layers of grey river silt, calcified gravel, and decaying water weeds. The bronze body remains perfectly intact, its outer inscriptions still carrying the beautiful, elegant text of its original design, yet it hangs entirely mute beneath the grey surface of the water. When the great seasonal storms move through the valley, when the wind howls and the earth shakes, the bell cannot respond with a single vibration. Its throat is choked by a heavy, solid block of river mud, turning its magnificent, world-awakening instrument of sound into a dead, buried anchor that can do nothing but sink deeper into the stagnant slime of the marsh. The alternative to this buried anchor is the absolute inhabitation of the thawing of the bronze throat and end state that completely bypasses the analytical gatekeeper. The thawing of the bronze throat is the spontaneous, unedited reclamation of our original voice, occurring when the calcified silt of our perfectionism is violently ripped out of our system by the sudden volcanic upsurge of our instinctual intelligence. In this state of liberation, our words and our actions do not wait for the permission of our intellectual quality control department. They emerge straight from the dark furnace of our low pelvis and our hot gut, carrying the raw, unfiltered thunder of our immediate reality. The sound that breaks through our lips is not clean, it is not balanced, and it is thoroughly uncurated. It carries the rough, jagged edges of our current, imperfect skin. It risks the cracked note, the public failure, and the undignified exposure of our limitations, because it has forgotten the very existence of the internal auditor. To inhabit the bronze throat is to drop the identity of the perpetual studento, give up the safety of the drafting table, and to become instead the heavy, resounding strike of the metal itself, letting our reputation and our technical charts be completely shattered by the massive, open-air resonance of a live performance. We are a generation of silt-drowned bells resting in the mud, praising our immaculate design, while our throats are packed with weeds. We feel the terrible biological cost of this permanent postponement within the deep fascia of our mammalian frame, an isometric distortion where our terror of imperfection is cast into the alignment of our shoulder girdles and our throat. When we live our lives in a state of chronic calibration, our body locks itself into a defensive holding pattern, a physical brace designed to catch and strangulate our voice before it can leave our mouth. Observe the subscapularis muscles, the clavicles, and the upper margins of our trapezius. In a human being who has surrendered the luxury of the blueprint, the shoulders rest low and wide like a heavy beam of wet wood, letting the arms hang loose from the torso and allowing the chest to breathe with a broad, horizontal softness. But in the body of the invisible editor, the shoulder girdles are pulled continuously forward and upward in a microscopic clench. We are carrying our arms like a shield across our heart center, our chest concave, our pectoral tendons shortened into tight wires that hold our creative tools in a state of permanent, defensive hesitation. This structural vigilance moves upward to cast an iron vice around the thyroid cartilage and the deep muscles of the larynx, creating the physiological signature of the swallowed scream. The micromuscles surrounding the vocal cord, the cricothyroid, and the lateral cricoarytenoid, held under a continuous, low-grade isometric tension that starves the throat of its natural elasticity. When an original creative impulse rises from our center, it hits this muscular wall and is instantly flattened. We swallow our expression before it can form a sound, our throat turning dry, cold, and tight as we force our energy back down into the lungs. This lock acts as a mechanical filter, ensuring that when we do open our mouth to speak or create, our output is stripped of its raw mammalian weight, delivered only as a thin, highly intellectualized, and carefully modulated frequency that cannot disrupt our social standing. The neck tissues harden into fibrous pillars. The skin over the front of the throat turns pale and cold, and the entire vocal apparatus lives in a state of permanent public relations lockdown, ensuring that we never make an unvetted statement that could reveal our hidden vulnerability. Watch the thoracic spine and the upper lung field to see the ultimate victory of the drafting table over our biological conductivity. The upper back of the hesitant hand is frozen into a rigid, immobile plate of Bonea structural stone shield that isolates our heart from the environment. We do not breathe into the back body. We do not let our ribs expand into the space behind us. We hold our respiration in the uppermost apex of our lungs, a shallow, rapid, and high-frequency pant that keeps our nervous system floating in a state of permanent anticipatory dread. This thoracic freeze ensures that our diaphragm remains held in a high, defensive suspension, acting as an internal partition that cuts off our head from the instinctual power of our navel. We are literally living from the throat upward, our intelligence detached from our gut, our words manufactured in the sterile clean room of our conceptual mind, completely unaware that our lower organs are starving for expression. Our thoracic vertebrae are crying from their own calcified isolation, and our original song is dying of suffocation because we have refused to let our breath drop beneath the line of our technical charts. We must find the discipline to demolish the elegant, spiritualized arguments we use to justify this lifestyle of permanent delay. The ego has discovered that the role of the unfinished masterpiece is the ultimate hiding place from the cold wind of reality. As long as our work remains a blueprint on our desk, we can preserve the illusion of our own genius. A blueprint never fails an audition. A manuscript that is never submitted never receives a rejection letter. A canvas that remains white never reveals the limitations of our brushstroke. By remaining the permanent scholar who is always preparing, always training, and always waiting for a more aligned moment, we protect our pride from the undignified necessity of being an amateur. We can feel superior to the clumsy builders who are out in the mud making vulgar mistakes, completely blind to the truth that those broken actors are tasting the raw, salt-rich juice of actual existence, while we are turning into calcified mummies inside the pristine conservatory of our own untested perfection. The moment we leave the drafting table, or allow our charts to be violently torn away from our hands, the moment we force our voice to strike the air without a single editing cycle to guarantee its beauty, the illusion of our mastery is shattered instantly. The cold, silent indifference of the material world strikes our bare skin like a wave of mountain water. Our unedited reality drags our awareness out of the conceptual sanctuary and plunges our consciousness down into the crude density of the current moment. This is the first arrow, the raw, unfiltered collision of a live creative impulse intersecting with the blunt gravity of the physical world. The natural response of an unsilted throat would be to receive the strike, to let the chest shake, to let the voice crack, treating the friction as the simple, honest vibration that happens when an authentic life stops preparing and agrees to sound its note. But the invisible editor within us cannot tolerate the exposure of its smallness. The moment the raw vibration hits our throat, our internal investigator fires the second arrow, deploying its psychological library to freeze the impact. The mind translates the crude, unpolished quality of our initial expression into an immediate existential catastrophe, whispering that we are incompetent, that we are unintegrated, and that we must instantly silence ourselves until we can present a more mature presentation. We pull our shoulders back into their defensive shield. We tighten the iron vise around our larynx, and we return to our walnut desks to plan another restructuring cycle, completely blind to the truth that this editing flurry is a form of slow spiritual suicide. We are murdering our right to participate in the living tapestry to protect our reputation as an enlightened witness, choosing the safe sterility of a dead blueprint over the messy, bleeding birth of our genuine voice, keeping our bronze throat packed tight with mud while the great storm of life passes over our heads without ever hearing our sound. To trace this creative paralysis from its physical cage down into the raw, unsanitized corridors of our daily ambitions and professional conditioning, we must systematically examine the specialized personas we construct to hide our terror of raw exposure. When we surrender our life force to the architecture of perpetual preparation, we do not merely sharpen our pencils or read another research paper, we develop highly intricate, defensive psychological programs that convert our dread of being seen as ordinary into a noble, highly sophisticated quest for spiritual alignment. We split into distinct behavioral archetypes, each designing an automated fortress to escape the blunt friction of the present, yet both suffering from the same systemic, somatic starvation as we use our advanced technical training to strangle our authentic voice before it can disturb our social safety. Consider first the figure who moves through the world as the perpetual scholar. To encounter this individual in a classroom, a university lounge, or a professional seminar is to witness a human system that has converted the act of learning into an absolute maximum security bunker. They are the chronic collectors of lineages, the insatiable consumers of advanced workshops, and the permanent residents of the training phase. Their resume is a magnificent, multi-layered shield composed of prestigious certifications, degrees, and endorsements from recognized masters across the globe. They speak with an exhaustive, encyclopedic vocabulary, effortlessly mapping the historical development of their field, quoting complex theoretical frameworks, and analyzing the creative output of everyone around them with a razor-sharp, clinical precision. Yet, if you observe this scholar when the bell rings and the room demands that they step out of the audience to deliver their own unvetted translation of the teachings, when the stage requires them to offer a raw, spontaneous transmission that cannot be footnoted or backed by a university department, their entire physiology enters into a state of acute, catastrophic panic. Their collarbones haul instantly toward their ears like an iron crane, their throat muscles contract until their voice turns into a thin, breathless rasp, and their mind launches a furious, protective sequence of intellectual rationalizations. They tell the room that the timing is unaligned, that their methodology requires one more phase of peer review, or that they must complete another advanced training module before they can safely authorize their own expression. The perpetual scholar is utilizing the identity of the humble student as a brilliant, unassailable alibi to avoid the undignified necessity of being an amateur. They have established an internal prerequisite loop that can never be satisfied by reality. By continuously positioning themselves as the one who is still preparing, still studying, and still integration testing their framework, they ensure that their actual core never has to face the cold, unedited verdict of public indifference. They worship the dead texts of ancient masters because a text cannot talk back, cannot reject their interpretation, and cannot expose the clumsy, childlike vulnerability of their untested flesh. They spend their entire life force building a magnificent museum of borrowed wisdom, standing in the marble hallways as the immaculate curator, while the living bird of their own unique medicine is slowly suffocating inside a locked glass cabinet in the basement. Contrast this with the second archetype that populates our silent workshop, the invisible editor. This is the individual who does not lack the courage to begin. They possess an abundance of raw creative drive and frequently produce vast mountains of work in the deep, unwitnessed isolation of their private quarters. They write thousands of pages, paint complex hidden canvases, or record elaborate musical compositions when the house is empty and the doors are locked from the inside. They are not hiding from the act of creation. They are hiding from the act of letting their creation exist in an unmonitored world. The moment their work approaches a state of technical completion, the exact moment a manuscript demands to be sent to a publisher, or a painting requires a frame to be hung in a public gallery, the invisible editor becomes a ruthless, internal executioner. They enter into an obsessive, high-frequency loop of microscopic modifications, rewriting the introductory paragraph for the 50th time, adjusting the tone of a single brushstroke, or shifting the structural equilibrium of a sentence until its original, wild vitality has been completely sanded away. If a friend or an agent attempts to pry the work from their hands, the editor feels an immediate, visceral spike of threshold terror, a blind instinctual panic that they are about to be exposed as a fraud, an unintegrated charlatan, or a child pretending to be a pastor. To prevent this exposure, they execute a systematic act of creative infanticide. They delete the hard drive, they burn the sketchbook, or they hide the project away in a dark drawer under the pretense that the output did not meet their internal standard of excellence. They use their highly refined aesthetic taste as a weapon to murder their own children before anyone else can see them cry. They tell themselves that they are protecting the purity of their art, when they are actually protecting the fragile, narcissistic illusion of their own unshakable competence. They prefer to live as an unsung genius, whose perfect masterpiece was tragically withheld from a vulgar world, rather than risk the blunt, honest reality of being a real author whose book has a misspelled word on page 42 or a cracked note in the final stanza. To maintain these defensive citadels, whether it is the endless information gathering of the scholar or the self-sabotaging perfectionism of the editor, our physical body must execute an uninterrupted, high-maintenance act of biological holding. The human frame cannot be deceived by our academic arguments or our artistic rationalizations. It knows that to keep an authentic live-wire voice from breaking into the open air requires an immense, continuous expenditure of structural force. When we choose to live our lives in the drafting room, we freeze our physiology into a permanent state of muscular containment, casting a precise, diagnostic tax throughout our deep core to ensure that the volcanic heat of our gut can never rise up to shatter our social safety. Let us map this physical tax downward through our somatic landscape, observing the hard, fibrous restriction that clamps around the thyroid cartilagey mechanical reality of the swallowed scream. In an open, unsilted human being who has dropped the textbooks and agreed to sound their note, the larynx floats loosely in the front of the throat, rising and falling naturally with the shifting weight of the breath, acting as an open, resonant canyon that amplifies the raw, animal vibrations of the belly. But in the body of the invisible editor, the muscles surrounding the throat, the sternohyoid, the thyrohyoid, and the deep constrictors of the pharynx are held in a state of permanent, low-grade contraction. This clench pulls the thyroid cartilage downward and backward against the cervical spine, locking the vocal apparatus into a rigid, high-security clamp. We are literally swallowing our own expression before it can form a syllable in our mouth. This restriction ensures that whenever we speak or create, our energy is mechanically filtered through a dense layer of muscular resistance, stripping our voice of its raw, primordial authority and delivering it only as a flat, polite, and safe intellectual token. The skin over our throat turns pale, thin, and cold to the touch. The thyroid gland is starved of deep, pulsating circulation, and our entire vocal gateway feels like a narrow, rusted iron pipe through which we must squeeze our life force in tiny, curated drops, petrified that if we let the throat turn soft for even a single second, a wild, unedited roar of grief, rage, or ecstasy will break through the dam and level our respectable reputation to the ground. Move downward through the chest to witness the tight, locked flexors of our wrists and forearms, the clenched fist of secret creation. In a grounded master who has committed their hands to the raw loam of reality, the forearms are soft, flexible, and highly conductive channels, the wrists moving with a fluid, liquid grace that allows our creative tools to extend effortlessly from our core into the material world. But in the body of the perpetual scholar, who is always preparing and never striking, the flexor carpi radialis and the deep finger tendons are held under a continuous isometric squeeze. We are holding our tools with a desperate white-knuckled panic, our wrists locked like iron hinges, our fingers tensed into a permanent preparatory claw that hovers over the desk. This clench is the physical translation of our mental second-guessing. We are simultaneously trying to push the brush forward and pull it back, our forearms, turning into a battleground of opposing muscular forces. This continuous tension calcifies the wrist joints, creates chronic inflammation along the elbow ridges, and turns our hands into dry mechanical instruments that can only execute rigid, pre-planned patterns, completely cut off from the spontaneous, undulating rhythm of our instinctual intelligence. Finally, let us look at the rigid, immobile plate of the thoracic spine earth stone shield that we build across our back body to protect our heart center from the environment. In an uninsulated practitioner who lives on the open canvas, the thoracic vertebrae possess a soft, spring-like flexibility, expanding backward on every inhalation and twisting easily to absorb the blunt collisions of relational life. But in the body of the hesitant creator, the 13 bones of the upper back are welded together by an accumulation of dense, fibrous connective tissue, forming an unyielding wall of solid bone that acts as a structural armor plate. We do not allow our back body to be seen. We do not let our ribs widen into the space behind us. We face the world exclusively through our front line, leading with our intellectual eyes and our analytical face, while our rear territory remains a cold, dead zone of complete sensory numbness. This thoracic freeze acts as an absolute internal dam, preventing the rising current of our pelvic furnace from reaching our arms and our throat. We are living entirely from the collarbones upward, our consciousness trapped in the high, dry altitude of our strategic mind, while the massive instinctual engines of our low belly, our liver and our sex are locked away in a dark cellar, starved of expression, left to rot in the dark because we are too terrified of what would happen if we let that heavy primitive thunder rise up to color our pristine blueprints with its raw animal density. We find ourselves trapped in a state of chronic structural exhaustion, our system continuously burning its vital oil to maintain an illusion of preparation that never arrives at the threshold of action. We spend our days arranging our workspaces, buying the next software update, reading the next commentary on a commentary, and reviewing our past failures in our internal quality control department. We use our high-grade psychological vocabulary to pathologize our hesitation, calling it a trauma response, a freeze state, or an unintegrated archetype, completely blind to the truth that these sophisticated diagnoses are simply the latest layer of mortar we are applying to our fortress walls. We are trying to cure an evolutionary failure of courage through an endless accumulation of technical data, running around the outer perimeter of our bronze bell like a bright, calculating ghost, petrified of the realization that if we simply pick up the heavy wooden hammer and strike the metal with all our clumsy, unpolished mass, the raw vibration will shatter our blueprints, dissolve our authority, and force us to stand naked in the middle of our own imperfect life. Every masterclass we register for without launching our work is a stone we add to our own tomb. Every edit we perform to buy safety from criticism is a molecule of silt we pack into our own bronze throat. We look at the raw, uncertified builders who are out in the open valley, screaming their truths through cracked voices and painting their clumsy marks on the stone walls, and we look down at them from our high academic watchtower, analyzing their technical flaws with a cool, clinical superiority. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the display screens go dark and the textbooks are closed on our desks, we are forced to face the agonizing reality of our own self-inflicted exile. We know that those crude actors are warm, they are conductive, and they are being fed by the raw, mineral-rich currents of immediate human participation, while we are turning into cold, polished statues of pure marble, freezing to death inside the pristine conservatory of our own unattempted lives, our throats packed tight with grey mud, while the great wind of the cosmos roars through the trees outside our window, begging for a single honest note from our buried iron throat. To step out of this endless loop of self-editing and reclaim the primordial resonance of our organic presence, we must subject our internal workspace to an unyielding, razor-sharp surgical dissection. We must turn our diagnostic focus directly upon the precise threshold where a spontaneous life impulse is captured, commodified, and strangled by our internal quality control department, using an objective, somatic awareness to expose the exact psychological gears we use to sabotage our own grounding. In the deep lineages of human awakening, this critical friction is illuminated by understanding the divergence between the first arrow and the second arrow, a diagnostic lens that strips our perfectionist ego of its spiritualized and artistic disguises. The first arrow is the sudden, unedited upsurge of an original creative impulse or a blunt vocal truth rising directly from the wet loam of our gut, demanding immediate, unpolished execution in the material world. It is the raw vibration of life force trying to sound its note through our physical instrument. It is that crude, primitive melody that enters our mind while we are walking down a crowded street. It is that sharp, uncompromising boundaries statement that flashes through our throat during a tense relationship collision. Or it is that messy, unstructured paragraph that begs to be scratched onto paper without waiting for an outline. This first arrow is clean, it is objective, and it carries the heavy, unvetted power of our instinctual center. When it hits our frame, the biological animal registers a natural wave of somatic heat. The pulse quickens, the lower belly expands, and a deep, archaic energy travels upward toward our chest, demanding that we open our mouth and strike the iron bell of reality with our bare mass. This is the natural weather of the thawing throat. It is the necessary wild pressure that occurs when our original nature tries to break through the calcified silt of our social training, offering us a rare, primordial opportunity to abandon our blueprints and become a living sound. But as permanent scholars and invisible editors who have been conditioned to treat public perfection as our absolute safety net, we do not permit this initial vibration to complete its natural trajectory through our fingers and lips. The exact microsecond the tip of the first arrow touches the skin of our expression, our internal quality control department wakes up with a frantic, predatory ferocity, launching the second arrow from the high towers of our strategic intellect. The second arrow here is the immediate, lightning-fast deployment of our internal editing vise. We do not simply feel the creative current, we filter it through a complex maze of second guesses, aesthetic comparisons, and technical prerequisites. The mind launches a rapid sequence of panicked internal commentary. This impulse is too crude, it has been expressed by better masters before you. It is unintegrated and lacks technical symmetry. If you utter this word or make this mark right now, you will be exposed as an amateur, a fraudulent child who has not completed their training. You must silence this roar until you can polish its edges and present it in a safe, acceptable container. This is the ultimate self-sabotage of the hesitant hand. The second arrow is an act of creative infanticide disguised as a dedication to artistic excellence. The intellect does not initiate this frantic editing flurry to help us produce better art, it deploys it to protect our fragile, narcissistic pride from the terrifying, liberating reality of our own ordinary boundaries. The internal investigator realizes that if we remain standing in the middle of the room, if we simply breathe through the clumsy, unvetted upsurge and allow our voice to crack open in public without a textbook to validate our position, the illusion of our immaculate, superior authority will be utterly destroyed. To preserve its position as the unshaken witness, the mind uses the very language of professional competence, high aesthetic standards, and spiritual alignment to construct a maximum security stranglehold around our throat, convincing us that withholding our expression until it is flawless is an act of integrity, when it is actually a panicked, desperate flight from the dark, silent majesty of being a raw human being who is willing to make a beautiful, messy mistake in the open air. We must observe this investigative deflection operating in the ordinary, unglamorous arenas of our daily life. Imagine sitting at your drafting table late at night, a clean sheet of paper resting before your chest. Suddenly, a wild, chaotic sequence of words or an unstructured artistic vision enters your field, carrying an intense, visceral heat that makes your fingers itch for the charcoal. This is the first arrow, the clean, neutral vibration of the unnumbered canvas, offering you a rare opportunity to drop your academic credentials and inhabit the raw density of your current capacity. A deeply rooted practitioner would meet this upsurge with a heavy geological hospitality, letting their hands fly across the page, letting the lines be rough, crooked, and thoroughly terrible, treating the performance as a sacred conversation between their bones and the dark room. But the invisible editor within us cannot endure the degradation of its immaculate reputation. The moment the charcoal touches the paper and produces a mark that looks clumsy, childlike, or unaligned with our high aesthetic taste, the internal investigator fires the second arrow, converting the raw strike into an environmental disaster. The mind whispers, "This line is vulgar. It shows that your technique is completely unintegrated. You have not done enough shadow work to access your true creative voice. You should burn this sketch, close the notebook, and register for that advanced structural alignment course online so you can learn how to channel your energy without this embarrassing mess." In that fraction of a second, the collarbones are hauled back up toward the ears like an iron crane. The larynx is yanked downward into its public relations clamp. The wrist flexors squeeze the pencil into a white-knuckled vice, and the live creative current is instantly frozen, strangled, and returned to the dark storage of our unattempted dreams. We feel a clean, temporary surge of intellectual safety as we return to our familiar role as the silent scholar who is too deep to produce ordinary art, completely blind to the truth that we are murdering our own soul to protect our position on the display shelf, choosing the dead piece of an unblemished blueprint over the heavy, magnificent resonance of a live, imperfect voice. To break this cycle of permanent postponement, we must systematically demolish the central sanctuary upon which the silent workshop of the delayed strike is built, the illusion of the ready threshold. We live under the continuous ancestral delusion that if we can only achieve a state of flawless technical mastery, accumulate enough certifications from recognized masters, or complete a perfect sequence of emotional integration, there will come a designated day when we will step onto the earth completely immune to criticism, failure, or public embarrassment. We believe that our endless preparation is building a bridge to a phantom sanctuary, a pristine plateau where we can finally open our mouth and speak our ultimate truth without risking our social status or revealing our hidden smallness. This is a tragic, biological fallacy maintained by the distance we keep from our own ground. There is no ready threshold. The bridge you are building with your endless masterclasses does not lead to a sanctuary, it leads to a cemetery for things that were too terrified to be born. The more technical data you accumulate to protect yourself from failure, the more petrified you become of letting your voice strike the air, because you know with absolute, bone-deep certainty that your pride has grown so heavy that a single cracked note will level your entire identity to the ground. Life demands that you let the drafting table be violently smashed into pieces. You must give up your position as the untested genius, let the calcified silt of your academic reputation be torn away from your larynx, and agree to touch the crude, unsanitized bedrock of action as a completely ordinary, uncertified zero who is willing to fail in public 50 times before breakfast. Let us sink into the immense, crushing relief of this understanding for a long, unmanaged respiration cycle. The liberation of this perspective is like waking up from a lifelong nightmare where you have been standing in front of a massive, critical audience, holding a heavy bronze bell that you have spent 40 years polishing with a silk cloth, attempting to calculate the exact mathematical angle of the strike so that the note will sound perfectly harmonious to every ear in the valley. Your collarbones are screaming from the isometric tension of the coat hanger. Your forearms are locked into an agonizing white-knuckle squeeze. Your thoracic spine is welded into an unyielding stone shield, yet you stand there frozen, terrified that if you pick up the hammer, if your hand shakes or the bell produces a rough, discordant sound that reveals your lack of absolute mastery, your entire universe will collapse in judgment. To wake up is to realize that the polished bell is a tombstone for your life force. You throw the silk cloth into the mud, you pick up the heavy iron hammer, and you strike the metal with all your clumsy, unedited mass, letting the bell crack, letting the sound roar across the valley, with all its jagged, terrifying, and authentic thunder, discovering that the open sky does not judge your technical flaws, it welcomes your volume, merging your voice with the absolute, unsigned majesty of the storm that has no use for your certificates. When this somatic intelligence awakens within our muscle fibers, our relationship to our own artistic and vocal hesitation undergoes an absolute evolutionary reversal. When we feel the suffocating contraction of our creative panic, when the collarbones lift, when the larynx clamps down, and when our forearms turn to ice, because our internal quality control department has detected a flaw in our output, we no longer interpret these symptoms as a sign that we are unready or that we need to execute a new training phase. We do not say, "My technique is failing, therefore I must return to the classroom and hide behind a new methodology." We say, "The invisible Eton is panicking right now. There is a high, rigid iron vise locked across my thyroid cartilage. My shoulders are arching into a frantic protective posture to shield my heart center. My hands are frozen into a white-knuckled grip to prevent the ink from dropping onto the page. My mind is generating a dozen different intellectual rationalizations to avoid facing the raw, heavy sting of my own clumsy, amateur skin." This is the exact sensation of the silt-drowned iron bell being hit by a lightning bolt, forcing the grey river mud to yield its grip on the bronze throat. Observe the absolute, unassailable sovereignty of this positioning. The first statement is a market diagnosis that validates our slavery, transforming a passing threshold of vulnerability into an endless lifestyle of academic compliance. The second statement is a highly accurate, non-conceptual description of a somatic transformation taking place within our own biology. The first response is written by the permanent student who treats their expression as a commercial risk to be managed. The second response is spoken by the raw builder who simply accepts the crude weight of the friction, drops the editing software, and allows their voice to reverberate, knowing that the cracked note is not an obstacle to mastery, is the mastery. This is the path of the thawing throat. The total, unconditional willingness to sound your note while feeling completely uncertified, unvetted, and technically naked. It requires us to cultivate a fierce, primitive tolerance for our own public failure, refusing to use our knowledge as a transaction to buy safety from criticism. When you feel the sudden, suffocating squeeze of your own ordinary imperfection, that flat, unesthetic realization that your first chapter is poorly written, your initial brushstroke is childish, or your raw boundaries statement sounds clumsy and unintegrated. Instead of running back to your textbooks to plan a refurbishment cycle, you must have the discipline to execute the strike in the dark. Drop your attention out of your quality control department. Sink your awareness down beneath your rigid thoracic spine, into your tight forearms, your soft throat, and your heavy lower belly, and say to the silence around you, with your raw, unedited voice, "Right now I have no credentials, My blueprints are broken, my masterclass is over, and I am completely unready. This is what freedom feels like to an unsigned instrument. It is rough, it is loud, it is entirely unpolished, and it is the only sound that can break the mud. By doing this, you strip the drafting table of its hypnotic authority. The romance of the perpetual blueprint relies entirely on your avoidance of the real world. The illusion that you can achieve creative weight by accumulating tokens of academic approval from a safe distance behind a desk. The moment you bring the raw, chaotic reality of your unedited voice out into the massive space of your material existence, moment you treat your limitations and your clumsy attempts with the same objective curiosity that an old mountain ridge treats a landslide, spell of the watchtower is broken. The technical flaw is no longer a design catastrophe that requires another year of study. It is simply the heavy, honest texture of the terrestrial bedrock we have been called to shape. Our unpolished skin is no longer a barrier that keeps us from creating it, is the exact location where our true mastery begins. Let us realize that the modern obsession with continuous optimization, personal restructuring, and endless skill acquisition is a collective defense mechanism designed to protect us from the undignified necessity of being real. We are all participating in an institution of hyper-prepared hyper-dependence, pretending that we can achieve liberation by turning our life into an endless series of training modules and monitoring our technical development until we are completely immune to the terror of public failure. We look at each other's pristine, highly curated presentations, the articulate summaries of frameworks, the immaculate portfolios, the flawless professional credentials, and we think to ourselves, everyone else has arrived. Everyone else is authorized to speak. I am the only one who is drowning in an unintegrated, clumsy mess, but this is a grand, institutionalized illusion. Behind every perpetual scholar, behind every invisible editor who refuses to leave the drafting room, there is an organism that is petrified of the raw strike. There is a soul that is starving for the heavy resonance of the unnumbered canvas. There is a throat that is dying from its own iron vice. There is a hand that is locked in a living death because it has never allowed itself to drop its guard, let the blueprint tear, and strike its full, heavy mass against the cold bronze of the earth. When this truth pierces through our intellectual arrogance, the competitive isolation of our preparation hunting dissolves, replaced by a deep primitive conductivity. We see that the cold, silent indifference of the material world is not an enemy to our creative development, is our creative development. The unscripted collision, the public failure, and the exposure of our ordinary limitations are the very hammers that shatter the calcified silt within our throat, allowing our original voice to ring out across the hills. How can we be angry with the reality for providing the blunt friction we need to become real? How can we abandon the bell the exact moment the storm moves through the valley and the raw, anonymous strike becomes possible? The surgical edge of this practice does not cut to paralyze us, it cuts to activate our sound. It strips away the comfort of our academic credentials to reveal the immense, unassailable authority of our current, unedited presence. It invites us to stop treating our expression as a commercial risk to be managed from the safety of a watchtower, and to become instead the open, resounding bronze throat that has agreed to bear the wild, unsigned thunder of the immediate coordinate. It is a radical invitation to break the pencils, to smash the drafting table, and to inhabit the simple, crude, and magnificent majesty of our own unfinished masterpiece, fully awake to the raw and unpredictable current of existence that is happening right here on the heavy, unedited ground. To transition from the quiet, suffocating security of the drafting table into the roaring, unedited resonance of the thawing throat, we must subject our nervous system to a systematic, physical countertraining of attention. An organism that has been conditioned through decades of preparation hunting academic hoarding, and chronic thoracic bracing cannot be liberated by philosophical agreement alone. The instinct to pull our shoulder girdles upward, clench our wrist flexors, and run back to the classroom when creative panic strikes is an ancient, highly organized survival loop written into the very fascia of our mammalian biology. To dismantle its authority, we must enter into a precise, daily laboratory of somatic waiter, rigorous mind-body discipline that intentionally freezes the analytical editing engine, melts the public relations lock of the throat, and forces our bare awareness to inhabit the cold, dense marrow of our forearms and low pelvis. This training is not a method to achieve a more attractive or flawless style of expression. It is a heavy, weight-bearing exercise designed to build the biological capacity to strike the metal when the textbooks are taken away and your academic currency crumbles into worthless dust. The foundational practice of this bell-striking discipline begins at the vital choke point of our performative vigilance, the release of the hyperinflated shoulder crane and the mobilization of the anterior neck muscles. We dedicate the first 40 minutes of every morning to a physical sitting practice that completely violates the neat, immaculate geometry of the studio set or the academic lecture hall. We place our body directly on a hard, low-floor surface, allowing our knees to widen out toward the walls and dropping the full weight of our sacrum into the boards without the artificial support of stylized cushions or ergonomic chairs. We keep our mouth slightly open, letting the lower jaw hang loose, heavy, and completely uncurated, instantly yielding the internal clench that holds our face in a position of pleasant availability. Once the posture is anchored, we direct our microscopic focus to the delicate, shortened tissues at the front of the throat, the thyroid cartilage, and the top of the collarbones. In the ordinary state of the perpetual scholar, these muscles are held in an invisible, continuous state of upward tension, lifting the upper chest to project an illusion of flawless competence to the world. We breathe our attention directly into the hollow at the base of the throat, the very cave where the cricothyroid and thyrohyoid muscles are clamping down on the larynx. As we inhale, we do not let the lungs expand upward toward the ears. We force the breath to widen horizontally across the chest, pushing the collarbones apart like an iron bar. On every exhalation, we let out a low, unvocalized drop of total somatic relief, letting the entire upper ribcage sink downward like a heavy piece of wet canvas. We feel the collarbones drop into their natural horizontal oaken cradle, telling our mammalian system that it is safe to be rough, safe to be unvetted, and safe to exist without a textbook to buy protection from criticism. Simultaneously, we direct our awareness into the deep masseter muscles of the jaw and the tight, fibrous bands of our forearms. We recognize that the clenched fist of secret creation is cast into this region as a permanent state of artistic hesitation. While maintaining the heavy, relaxed collarbones, we begin to perform a slow, intentional rotation of the wrists, opening the palms completely toward the ceiling. We stretch the fingers wide, pulling the thumb backward until we feel the dry, intense friction of the flexor tendons along the interior ridge of the elbow. We track out the deep heat that begins to radiate through the wrist joints as the mechanical pivot of our white-knuckled grip is forced to yield. We do not perform this movement with the clinical neatness of a therapeutic routine. We inhabit it as a raw, instinctual reclamation of our unwitnessed skin. We visualize the calcified blueprints melting away from our fingertips, the blood flowing back into the hands and the forearms that have been starved of genuine movement by a lifetime of public relations lockdown. We let the forearms rest heavily on our thighs, holding the position for several deep breath cycles, letting our palms stay warm and soft, forcing our consciousness down out of the high control room of our intellect, and plunging it directly into the heavy mass of our limbs. With the upper gateway activated, we enter the second phase of the protocol. the melting of the rigid thoracic shield, and the drop of the awareness into the dark furnace of the low pelvis. The habit of the invisible editor is to hold the 13 bones of the upper back in a permanent, welded plate, pushing the front face forward and keeping the root suspended in a state of chronic flight from the void of public failure. To break this structural partition, we place our hands flat on our knees, close our eyes, and bring our attention to the long vertical line of the thoracic spine. As we breathe in, we consciously resist the urge to inflate the front lungs or to project our heart center forward into the room. We force the inhalation to travel down the back of the ribs, filling the space behind the shoulder blades and widening the upper back like a sail catching a cold mountain wind. The critical intervention occurs at the moment of exhalation. Instead of maintaining our rigid parade posture, we let the thoracic spine soften, broaden, and widen backward into the space behind us, allowing the ribs to collapse inward with a heavy geological weight. We allow the sacrum to drop its tail tuck and settle its full, unedited mass into the floorboards. As the air leaves the lungs, we feel our awareness drop through the tight, frozen channel of the diaphragm, moving straight down into the deep, dark chambers of our lower belly, our liver, and our sex. We force our attention to spread out into the very floor of our pelvis, imagining that our root is melting into the floorboards, expanding into the rough, neutral density of the soil beneath the house. We are training our organism to tolerate the sensation of being completely grounded in the unvetted dark. We are breaking through the internal suspension that has kept us floating as a permanent student, letting our weight drop beneath the line of our academic reputation, discovering that the bedrock does not require an advanced certification to hold our bones. As we stabilize this heavy, unarmored presence, we encounter the frantic, high-frequency panic of the editing mind, which will immediately begin to launch the second arrow to protest its loss of public safety. The internal investigator will scream that we are incompetent, that our output is vulgar, or that we need to draft a more mature blueprint to validate our expression. To manage this mental turbulence without choosing flight, we deploy the mind training protocol of the unnumbered canvas. The habit of the hesitant creator is to immediately convert every raw vibration or internal upsurge into a static question mark, mistaking the act of editing for the act of living. We strip the mind of this transactional power. When a wave of creative panic hits your system, perhaps an intense, cold contraction across the thyroid cartilage, or a sudden freeze along your forearms that arises when you realize you are about to fail in public, you intentionally freeze the analytical engine. You refuse to call the sensation an unintegrated archetype. You refuse to label it as a resistance loop. You refuse to package it into a beautiful explanation for your peers. You sit completely still within your wide knees, your dropped collarbones, and your heavy jaw, and you meet the sensation as a pure, non-conceptual bundle of terrestrial friction. You feel the raw thud of the heart, the cold squeeze of the larynx, the heavy weight in the lower pelvic bowl, and you treat it with the same objective, unblinking curiosity that an old boulder treats the winter rain. You do not try to fix it, you do not try to optimize it, and you do not run back to your textbooks to execute a refurbishment cycle. Let the void burn openly in the massive space of your bare presence, proving to your nervous system that you can experience the absolute maximum frequency of public failure without needing to open an exit door or check your reflection in the book of a master. Let us practice this fierce, anonymous hospitality right now, allowing the internal watchtower to crumble within the iron vault of our physical immovability. This formal counter-training on the floor is our laboratory. But the true forge of the thawing throat occurs when we step back into the high-fraction environments of our professional callings and our daily relationships. We do not leave our practice On the mat, we implement daily grounding anchrosomatic interventions that we deploy in the exact microsecond our pride intersects with the chaotic temptation of the drafting table. Imagine you are sitting at your desk, looking at a blank project, and you feel a sudden, compulsive urge to stop the work, read another research paper, register for another masterclass, or review your past failures in your quality control department. This is the precise threshold where the perpetual scholar would normally launch the second arrow and convert their life into a permanent research project. Instead of executing the retreat sequence, you deploy the grounding anchor. You do not move your hand toward the textbook. You do not open a new research window. You do not look away from the raw materials before you. Internally, you drop your attention completely out of your editing software and bury it in your soft throat, your wide, dropped collarbones, and your heavy lower belly. You let your lower jaw hang loose. Relax the thoracic spine backward into the support of your chair, and let the exhalation drop your center of gravity straight down into the floorboards. You find the exact physical coordinate of your creative panic, that high-frequency flutter in the throat, that fierce urge to lock your wrists and pull your shoulders forward, and you wrap it in a massive lower abdominal breath. You say to yourself, with total unadorned weight, the blueprint is torn, the masterclass is over. I have no certificates, I am striking the metal. By executing this somatic anchor, you perform a radical act of existential rebellion. You do not try to make your hesitation look professional. You do not try to artificially patch up your reputation or use your academic vocabulary to sound more competent than you are. You simply agree to hold the raw, unedited reality of your current capacity in the massive, unyielding bucket of your bare presence. Because you are refusing to pull the emergency lever or treat your expression as a commercial risk to be managed, your presence ceases to carry the thin, synthetic frequency of a permanent student. It carries the heavy, authentic gravity of an ancient iron bell that has agreed to sound its note in the open air. You can be rejected, you can be criticized, you can be witnessed as completely ordinary and unpolished by the entire arena, without needing to adjust your alignment or register for another training module to protect your fragile purity. We must apply this same unyielding discipline to our daily expressive and professional endeavors, implementing a strict protocol of structural fasting. The next time you create an artifact of your passage, whether it is a piece of text, a design solution, or a verbal statement, and you feel the sudden compulsive urge to immediately edit it, rewrite its introduction, or withhold it until you can achieve a state of absolute technical symmetry, pause before you hit the button. Ask yourself, with a cold, unblinking clarity, am I editing this work because it serves the true liberation of the world? Or am I manufacturing an automated fortress? Am I refining this line because the raw silence of my own unfinished masterpiece is currently demanding that I stand on the bedrock without credentials, and my pride is too terrified to face the vacuum? If you detect the frantic high-frequency panic of the invisible editor, have the courage to close the editing window and freeze your hand. Sit with the empty, unprotected space that prompted the desire to hide behind a blueprint. Feel the hunger of the ghost that wants to remain the immaculate witness for the room, and let that hunger burn itself out in the cold, silent chamber of your unmoving frame. By refusing to feed the internal investigator, you force the scattered cargo of your intellect to drop beneath your thoracic spine, converting the dry dust of your academic reputation into the dense, solid anvil of authentic human presence. This practice requires an internal discipline that is far more terrifying than the superficial alignment of modern spiritual curation. It is easy to remain the perpetual scholar. It is easy to spend a lifetime managing your skills from behind a wide desk. It is easy to feel deep while sitting in a classroom covered in certificates of approval. It is infinitely more difficult to look at your own ordinary limitations, your own unvetted dependency, or your own desperate need to be real, and to say, I am not going back to the training room. I am going to stand right here in the middle of this clumsy attempt. I am going to let my academic reputation be completely smashed by my own human volume. I am going to stay until the silt dissolves. But this difficult exposure is the only path that leads to genuine coronation. Every time you allow yourself to remain in the raw vibration without running back to a textbook, every time you choose to receive the world's indifference without translating it into an existential crisis, every time you let your blueprint be torn without trying to repair the frame, you are shattering the mirror hall of your own narcissistic perfectionism. You are proving to your nervous system that your survival does not depend on the immaculate curation of a technical presentation. You are learning that you can be unready, you can be crude, you can be thoroughly uncertified by the professional markets of the world, and the universe will still transmit its power through your soft throat and your grounded hands. You step out of the endless cycle of preparation to become what you have always been meant to be. Not a silt-round iron bell waiting for permission on a muddy bank, but a massive, resonant bronze instrument standing open in the storm, fully committed to the heavy, anonymous, and magnificent fire of immediate reality. When the insatiable hunger for perpetual preparation is finally laid to rest within the cold, mineral-rich depths of our unmonitored somatic core, a vast, non-conceptual weight claims the whole of our physical anatomy. We enter into the absolute inhabitation of the thawing of the bronze-throater baseline state of raw existential gravity, where the soul no longer requires the validation of a textbook, the credentials of a lineage, or the pristine security of an immaculate blueprint to justify its voice on this earth. The mind, which for decades operated as a frantic editing engine, continuously calibrating our expression and amassing certifications to outrun the threat of public failure, abandons its quality control software and collapses directly into the immediate, unvetted act of performance. It becomes as silent, spacious, and clear as a mountain peak after a major landslide. We no longer treat our creative impulses or private expressions as risks to be managed from the safety of a watchtower. We agree to be rough, we agree to be amateurs, and we commit our unsigned flesh to the heavy reality of the bedrock without a single masterclass manual to guarantee our accuracy. This total surrender manifests as an immediate, profound structural rebirth throughout the entire matrix of our frame. The chronic, high-frequency inflation that held our tissue in a state of permanent hesitation begins to liquefy and flow downward into the floorboards. The muscles surrounding the thyroid cartilage relax their downward grip, allowing the larynx to float loosely in the front of the throat, turning our vocal apparatus into an open, resonant canyon that amplifies the raw vibrations of the belly. The shoulder cranes drop completely, releasing the isometric tension across the subscapularis and upper trapezius, transforming the upper torso into a soft horizontal cradle of wet oak. Downward through the central line of the body, the rigid plate of the thoracic spine yields its welded block, opening the ribs to expand backward on every inhalation and letting the breath drop effortlessly beneath the line of the navel. The tight flexors of our forearms and wrists unlock their white-knuckled vice, allowing the blood to surge back into our fingertips, turning our hands into soft, conductive instruments that can execute the spontaneous rhythm of our instinctual center. We are no longer a silt-drowned iron bell resting in a decorative paralysis. We are a massive bronze instrument plugged straight into the earth, our whole biology vibrating with the immense, unedited joy of simple, uncurated expression. In this state of deep geological authority, our relationship to our own artistic and vocal limitations undergoes an absolute, irreversible mutation. We find ourselves anchored in a vast, non-conceptual stability that no longer interprets a cracked note, a clumsy paragraph, or our own public failure as an environmental catastrophe that requires a new training module or a tactical retreat to the classroom. We stand firm in the open valley. We let our academic reputation be burned to ashes. We let our charts be torn bare. And we let our pristine blueprints be completely smashed by the rough water of the current moment, knowing that the structural flaw is not a design failure to be fixed, but the very forge through which our original tone is sounded. We stop treating our expression as a commercial risk to be managed from behind a desk, because we realize that the untouchable master we have been trying to play is an embalmed ghost born from a petrifying dread of being ordinary, and that the only true mastery is the total dissolution of the one who is trying to look flawless. This was the ultimate, unvetted transmission of the ancient builders and the unpolished creators who lived, spoke, and struck the metal in the total sanctuary of immediate participation. They did not teach us to spend our lives hoarding knowledge from the safety of a permanent student desk. They demonstrated the power of letting the drafting table be violently smashed and learning to sound our note without a single certificate to authorize our position. They reminded us that the ultimate resonance we have been hunting for a lifetime cannot be achieved by accumulating tokens of academic approval, because our baseline presence is already the very bronze that the great wind of the cosmos is trying to strike into a world-awakening song. Our unpolished skin is not a barrier that keeps us from creating it, is the exact location where our true power begins. Let us stand now in the dense, unyielding sanctuary of this total exposure, sounding our note from the deep center of our unmonitored core. The textbooks have been closed, the watchtowers have been dismantled, and the commercial markets of our public relations have been leveled to the ground, leaving us entirely exposed to the crude, magnificent majesty of this unedited space, this unscripted collision, and this raw, heavy respiration cycle. The blueprints are gone, the masterclass is over, and the hammer is firmly planted in the hand. And so, as the editing engine grinds to a permanent halt and the safety of your preparation dissolves into the ground, only one question remains to echo through the dark, bottomless depth of your unsigned frame. If the classroom doors are locked forever and the books never open again, what is the sound of your strike when there is no master left to grade your note?